thank you for coming along today. You spoke on the panel earlier, and you were talking about nuclear energy, and you called it a taboo. Why is that?
Well, traditionally, nuclear energy has been a bit of a taboo within the environmental movement. The environmental movement grew up out of the peace movement, which kind of came from opposition to nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs testing. And so nuclear energy got conflated with nuclear weapons, and as a result has always been a real taboo within the environmental movement. But in light of climate change, that's starting to change. You know, people are starting to ask the question, how can we continue to power civilization without destroying it? And for that, we might need nuclear energy alongside all the other low-carbon options.
Do you think it will play a big part?
I think that it will continue to play a part so long as the industry gets its act together and starts to drive down costs and speed up the rate of deployment. I think there is an existential crisis facing the industry today, honestly, in Europe and in the United States, where people are sort of saying, well, hang on a minute, you look too expensive and slow compared to other low-carbon options. So the industry really does need to get its act together and start to deliver. But to do that, we also need commitment and certainty in terms of regulatory frameworks to enable that investment to happen and enable that, you know, the building to take place. If that's the case, if we really start taking it seriously and building seriously into a program, then we could actually start to see very low-cost nuclear plants being delivered in Europe and in the United States, as we're seeing already happening elsewhere in the world, where nuclear plants are being delivered today that are competitive with fossil fuels and even renewable energy.
Yeah, because you mentioned it's not inherently expensive or difficult, it's just because it's the first to be deployed.
Yeah, it's the first of a kind problem. You know, when you're building a very large, complicated piece of infrastructure for the first time, it's going to be expensive and slow. And that's what we're seeing when we look outside the window and we look at the first of a kind plant in the UK. But what's really interesting is that when you move away from the first of a kind plant to the next one, you could see a very steep cost reduction curve. So we'd expect to see at least a 30% cost reduction for the next plant that gets built and subsequent cost reductions even after that.
I'm not sure how Adam felt about it, the real environmentalist from Extinction Rebellion on the panel. But lots of people kind of in Extinction Rebellion, they all have different views, but some of them are actually calling for, you know, a revolution in the truest sense. And you said maybe that's not such a good thing. Why is that?
Well, revolutions can be dangerous, and one of the things that can happen is that you can really, if you try to move things too quickly, causing a lot of disruption for the public, causing a lot of change that people didn't ask for, then you can trigger a backlash. And so the big risk I see here with calling for a revolution without the political and the public mandate for very dramatic change is that people will reject it. And from a climate perspective, we just don't have the luxury of time.
Yeah, what's a better way of making sure that we can go, you know, whatever, net zero by 2050 or whatever targets are in place? How can we make that happen quickly in terms of, you know, political and society terms without endangering people?
We're looking to develop the most cost-competitive solutions that are scalable, so climate-scale solutions that can replace or substitute for existing fossil fuels sources of energy, whether that's for the power sector, heat for industry, or indeed for fuels for transport. And doing that as cost-effectively as possible is going to be really critical. And that's a big challenge because the one thing about fossil fuels is that they're very readily available, they're easy to transport, and they're pretty good value. So that's our challenge, and for that we're going to need a lot of innovation. But that's one of the ways in which we'll be able to achieve the scale of transition that's needed within the timescales that are necessary without causing unnecessary disruption to people's lives, requiring large-scale change and investment.
And finally, do you have faith in big business and politicians? Because both of those people from both of those backgrounds have been on the stage today. Do you have faith in them to actually, you know, make the changes that are needed in the time frame that we need to hit?
You know, I think what we are going to need is everyone pulling in the same direction. So we're going to need clear market signals from government through market-based instruments and regulation that's set appropriately to enable investment by industry. We then need industry to invest in that innovation that will be necessary. And yeah, we need civil society-based organizations to hold them both to account.